Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sci-Fi Chat podcast. I'm Zoe Kirk Robinson.
And I'm Jennifer Kirk.
And today we're going to start with a question that I'm going to drop on you based on a conversation we had yesterday when we were looking at that LBC radio conversation about Thomas and Friends.
Well, we weren't looking at it, we were listening to it.
It had a picture on the screen that said LBC.
Well, we listened to it through a TV. But yeah, no, that was an interesting thing. And it's kind of crept up on me. It's something that when I grew up, I was quite a big Thomas the Tank Engine fan, but sort of classic old school, reverent Wilbert Awdry stuff. And they've completely revamped it. And it's really very much divided opinion. But do you want to spell out what it is that exactly is happening?
Oh, right. There's a new film, Thomas the Tank Engine. It's called Thomas and Friends. And according to the BBC, Thomas the Tank Engine launches 13 new international friends for animated film. But to be honest with you, I don't mind the animated new engines. I don't even mind the CGI, even though it looks really, really cheap from my point of view. That's the kind of standard that is there for young kids. Back when we were a kid and our parents saw what we were watching, they probably thought that looked cheap and tacky too. So I have no problem with that. The engines, some of them look alright, don't they?
Well, let's have a look. I'll put my glasses on.
We've got, some people may say they're a bit stereotypical for the area. Like the Belgian one looks a little bit like the Belgian flag, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they say making popular with steam train fans, according to the film's makers. I guess they haven't met many steam fans. They'll be counting the rivets and saying it's wrong. I'll tell you that now. You know,
yeah, steam train fans, like any other retro or technology fans, are going to go, well, that's not quite right. Now this one, Ashima of India, I like the look of that. That is bright, it's colourful, it looks pretty good to me. But I'm not a train person, so...
See, I think that the problem that I personally find myself having with this is not about the new trains. It's actually about kind of what we talked about. It feels like, and you know, we listened to the theme music. And it jarred. It was, you know, so here and now, gone tomorrow, appealing to a little niche that some focus group somewhere's come up with. And I thought, it's not Thomas the Tank Engine. What they've actually created is something that's not Thomas the Tank Engine. And, you know, for Thomas the Tank Engine is... That's these. You know, I've got 3 random books just pulled off the shelf. So they're Troublesome Engines, Henry the Green Engine, and Toby the Tram Engine. This is Thomas the Tank Engine. That is...
the old watercolour style.
Yeah. But, you know, with the stories in these, it was all about Britain's railways pretty much in the 1950s and 1960s. And it had this wonderful, stylised, simpler times kind of feel to it. And it was of that era and remained in that era. And I think updating it to the modern day, it stops being Thomas the Tank Engine. It just isn't Thomas the Tank Engine anymore. It's become something else, a bit like Chuggington. And you have nothing wrong with Chuggington. And I felt, the way I described it, is it felt that somebody is freeloading on somebody else's idea and changing it beyond the original mission. You know, this is major mission creep. And I don't like it.
So that's an idealised version of the 50s and 60s. If it's true, therefore, from my point of view, I came across it in the 80s, and I think you would have too. Is it a nostalgia thing? Is Thomas at its core a nostalgic thing?
Yeah, I think it started out that way, perhaps. I mean, I was actually at the core market when the very final Wilbert Awdry book came out, Tramway Engines, I think it is. I'm looking, seeing if there's a list on these. Because I know his son sort of took over and published a number of books. And I don't know, call me old school, but I never really read his son's books that he added to the series. Let's have a look, right.
Can't be nostalgic. First published in Great Britain in 1952.
Yeah, Tramway Engines was that came out in the early 80s, and I do remember buying my copy of it back then. I think it cost me 80 pence in hardback. I mean, that's a sign of the times. But, see, I was born in 1979.
My goodness, you're old.
Yeah,
You're
my childhood is pretty much the 1980s. So when I was avidly consuming these books, it was a time that didn't exist. I was reading books about things like the Wisbech and Upwell Tramway, which is what Toby the Tram Engine is based on, that didn't exist and hadn't existed in the UK for probably 12 to 15 years. It hadn't existed. So I'd never known the real things. And, I accepted them quite readily. And I know my little nephew, he's what, 5? He's about a 5-year-old nephew. He loves these, the original Thomas the Tank Engine. And they have a substance and a depth to them. The stories, yes, they are fairly simplistic. They're not long stories, but they don't patronise the children who'll be reading them. And, they're very accessible. And they deal with railway issues and running a railway, how a railway runs, in a manner that is factually fairly accurate, but again doesn't patronise or doesn't go into too deeper detail to bamboozle small children. And I grew up with on the TV Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, narrated by Ringo Starr. And they were actually, I think they were like Gauge 1 or Gauge 2 models, live action, filmed with proper scenery. And if anybody's seen those Thomas the Tank Engine series, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And the CG stuff, it feels like a cheapening of it all that has become far more simplistic. It's starting to stray away from the core ethos of Thomas the Tank Engine. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's not Thomas the Tank Engine, and it feels a bit like when they remade the Italian Job, and it wasn't even in Italy. It was like they'd decided it was easier to start a new thing by freeloading on the goodwill and history of an old thing than to actually do something from scratch. Maybe I'm rocking on it really harsh.
Is this the same situation that I had with Thundercats Go?
Possibly.
I like the old Thundercats. It's not very good. It's actually really badly written, and a lot of the animation is cheap. But I loved it as a kid, and as a result, I still find something good in it now. And then they brought out Thundercats Go, a super deformed, cheaply animated cash-in that has nothing to do with the original, aside from some of the characters have the same names and basic same design of costume. Yeah. It's terrible. It looks awful. I will still watch it because at the end of the day it's more Thundercats, but I will look at it from the case of this is not Thundercats, it's just pretending to be. But then again, I was thinking about the issue with Thundercats Go, and my main issue is the art style. The art style is this type of millennial, awful art that is going to it'll be the thing that defines this era in time. Like the way you look back at 60s art and it's all psychedelia and things like that.
And it looks dated.
Yes. Or the 80s where it has the super fluid, made in Taiwan for pennies because they were essentially just exploiting the fact that the standard of living there was cheaper, but great art and it looked brilliant. Then you come into the 90s and it starts doing terrible CGI. Well, this era is going to be super deformed, cheaply drawn, photoshopped, basically, artwork.
Yeah, but not done well. Not done to the extent where, like, a Hollywood movie would have CG that you wouldn't necessarily easily spot as CG. But it looks like it's been done cheap.
It looks like it's been done by children.
Yeah.
That's the problem with Super Deformed. That one. It was great with something like Steven Universe, where Steven Universe didn't have a previous design. It wasn't something where you looked at it and went, that's not X, because that is X. It was exactly where it is. And then other things have copied it, like Teen Titans Go. What happened to Teen Titans Go? Well, Thundercats Go, or Thundercats Raw. I'm getting them mixed up. Teen Titans Go was awful. Thundercats Raw is awful. Because they're not what they used to be. And I can't get past that in my head. I understand that kids come into it fresh will not know the difference and will enjoy it for what it is. But I can't, because it's not what it's claiming to be. And that's my biggest issue. Is that the same thing that you're doing here? Will kids that see this, having not seen the original Thomas, have a problem with it?
I think they'll accept it, but I don't think that they will remember it with the same kind of fondness when they get older as we now remember the original things from our childhood that were done, because a lot of them were hand animated, hand drawn. There's a higher quality feel to it. And one of the things which I noticed, I'm too old to really to have watched things like Fireman Sam, but I am aware that the earlier series were done as like a stop motion type thing.
Yes, they were.
And with proper sets. They looked far more realistic. There was a much more realism to them. And then at some point, they then went all CG. And the CG looks rotten as anything. It's really rubbish. And my thoughts are that, for example, my nephews, when they get to our kind of age and look back and reminisce, they'll probably, if they reminisce about liking Fireman Sam, they're more likely to remember with fondness the original series with the higher production values than the later stuff where the cheapening has kicked in and things just look rubbish.
That goes against what I've just said, though, doesn't it? Thundercats. I remember Thundercats fondly. I like Thundercats. If you watch it now, you can see that the scripts have been cheapened out on, the animation has been cheapened out on, the voice actors have phoned in most of their lines. The entire thing is cheap.
Yeah, but what you're saying is, Thundercats, when it was first shown on TV, the very first series was actually, it was hand-drawn animation, I remember.
Yes, but it was cheap hand-drawn animation. There are skipped animation.
Oh yeah, it was like the Hanna-Barbera school of animation.
Or let's go to the other extreme. He-Man, 65 episodes in one series with a budget of 20 quid, that kind of thing. Most of the episode is reused animation every single week. They reused more stock animation than Hanna-Barbera ever did. But He-Man is fondly remembered.
But did they pander to trends of the time? Or did they actually create the trends of the time?
That is a different thing, isn't it? I think they probably created a lot of trends. They certainly created the trend of doing the half-hour advert for the toys.
There is that. I think the problem with this is to my ears when I listen to the theme music and what I've seen of stills from the production of it, it feels like a bunch of TV execs are trying to be like hip and down with the kids without actually having a proper grasp of what the kids really want. They've probably had a little focus group of 5-year-olds and they've plied them with orange squash and plenty of sweeties, and they've shown them this, and anybody who knows little 5-year-olds, they're not going to go, oh, that's rubbish, that is. That if you put them out of their comfort zone and ask them, so did you like that? Did you like that? Would you like some more sweeties? Another cup of squash? Did you like that? They're going to go, yeah, that's great. And their attention span is terribly short, and they've probably forgotten what they said or what they thought about it, or even what they saw by the time they've left the room. And these TV execs have latched onto this, and there's probably a whole big focus group about, oh, we could do this. Oh, this will be really hip and down with the kids. And it feels like it's what happens when you design something by committee. And the committee's all trying to be like right on and hip, and actually not.
But at the end of the day, I think we're not the target audience, and that's...
Oh, no.
That I think is the biggest issue with a lot of this stuff. Thundercats Raw, Teen Titans Go, Thomas and Friends, we're not the target audience. It's not the thing that it claims to be, but at the same time, was it actually claiming to be, or is it just the new thing? See, I look back at let's have a look at something else that is now actually fondly remembered. Let's look at Ghostbusters. The original film is brilliant. People kind of like the second film most of the time. They absolutely love the real Ghostbusters cartoon. And then in the 90s came Extreme Ghostbusters. And it failed. It flopped after a couple of series. But when you look at it now, those series are actually really well written, really well dealt with. It's respectful to the originals. It's respectful to the audience. But it wasn't what people thought, so it failed. And now people look at it quite fondly, especially in comparison to the 2016 reboot/remake, which I actually thought was all right, but a lot of people hated.
Right, I'm going to have to moderate this because I think we're getting our own mission creep here, and we're sort of circling in wider and wider circles. So we need to focus on the original question. Have we answered this? Have we got a conclusion that we?
My conclusion is that we are not the target audience, and what we think isn't going to matter.
So basically, we're not hipping down with the kids either. So actually, we're about as far from, we used to be with it, but then they've changed what it was, and actually we're now miles away from it.
Possibly. I think it's going to be fine. It's not the original. It's not even trying to be the original. Let's face it. So. Seeing it on its own, it's probably going to be all right.
I think it's going to be successful to some degree, but in terms of longevity, I don't think it's going to have the same following that the original had, for the reasons that we've kind of gone through, I guess.
I'm going to disagree with that because I think it's going to be the same thing that I said with Thundercats. It's not going to be great, but kids are going to remember it fondly because they're going to filter it through their kid memories.
Was it just there's one little point here? It looks and feels a lot like Chuggington. If anybody's seen that, I'm too old.
The CG stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is just throwing this out there, talking about the TV execs think they're being hip and with the kids and actually not being. My nephews watched Chuggington and they watched Thomas the Tank Engine. But now that they've moved on, the ones that they still keep coming back to and still talk about and still have the fondness for is the original Thomas the Tank Engine. Chuggington has been forgotten because this sort of here today, gone tomorrow, chasing a fad almost style has not got the longevity of something that was crafted with a kind of a labour of love by initially one person, but with an infectious love that instilled generation after generation of people to really love this idea of this world with talking trains.